And I'm like, dude, we just gotta we gotta start recording the second we walk in the door. Because like some of the best part of the conversation is just what happens before you're like, all right, hey, so like welcome to the freight pod, you know?
Yep.
It's and you can just splice that shit in there. So
yeah, no, I'm with you. I remember you telling me that as a piece of advice when I first asked you about starting a podcast. And I haven't done that. But I do. I recognize it. I recognize how there's an opportunity there to capture some good conversation.
Yeah. That's part of the reason I'm like a no prep guy when it comes to the podcast. Because it's like you get good shit out. And then it'll often feel more like wrote or prepared. And also I reference things. But I'm like, oh yeah, well, like we were talking in prep about blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, all right, well, if I'm a listener, I wasn't a part of prep.
Yep.
I feel like I'm on the outside. So, all right, where are you today? You in Chicago today?
I'm in Chicago.
Yeah.
I'm in Chicago. I was struggling. I've been struggling for a couple of weeks, just mentally. Again, the operating system is not feeling like it's operating effectively. And I was in a good rhythm. You know, I started working out with a trainer 3 times a week in the morning, 6:30 a.m.
Where do you go? Do you go to FFC or something?
No, I go to this place, Wattage, which is like, you know, if I want to walk, it's like a 12-minute walk from my condo where I just drive over there. And like I was trying to just build this good routine. One of the most challenging things about not feeling like you've found a purpose at work is it leaves this kind of void during the day where you just you don't have a North Star. And as someone who has always invested most of myself into work and not done enough of investing in myself personally, it has put me in a position where I've always leaned on that professional work North Star. It's like when I would wake up for the day, it's like, okay, I got to work. Like I know what my work requirements are. Let's go do those things.
Right. Totally.
And since leaving Molo a year and a half ago, I no longer have those things. And with a void on the personal front of not having a strong operating system of like every morning I do these routines, these 7-8 things that like they're small W's, small wins that like make me feel better about myself. Not having that to fall back on when I, left Molo put me in this weird place where I just, it's taken a long time for me to figure out how to prioritize the personal.
I've been thinking a lot recently about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? And I've always sort of thought of myself as an intrinsically motivated person because no one ever has to like tell me to do stuff. But I actually have started thinking a little bit more recently that I might like I am a little bit extrinsically motivated in the sense that, and I think this will be the same for you, I really care about delivering for other people. And like, so when I think about Molo and your experience at Molo and how you felt about your employees and how you felt about your customers and how you felt about the capacity providers that worked with you guys, like you showed up every day for them. And like you did all of those things for them, and of course you benefited and like, but like that was, and you wanted outcomes for you. But like, I think that part of that challenge, because I have a similar thing, is that like, I care about not letting my teammates down. I care about delivering for the people around me. And that is motivation for me. And so like when I get into this, because I have a very similar thing, that if it's just a thing for me and it's not a part of this other routine that kind of gets the motor going, I find a lot more like on the weekends, for instance, like especially if my wife is gone for some reason, bro, it's hard. I mean, I'll want to, I go to the gym every day, but like, instead of being like, all right, great, I can get up and like have breakfast and then go to the gym early. And then I'll like sit around and read until all of a sudden it's like 4:30. And then I'm like, oh fuck, I got to go to the gym, and then run out the door to the gym. And then I'm always behind because of it, because there's not, I'm fully delivering for me. And it feels self-indulgent. I feel bad about that. But then the other part is I just, I'm not letting anybody down. And so there's a little bit less drive for it. I don't know. It's just an observation. I don't know if that fits for you.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think as I think about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, I think I fall in the extrinsic camp. I think that,
Yeah, but it's a
I think
spectrum is my
it,
point. Like you're not 100%. That's the realization I've had recently.
yeah, well,
right?
I think wanting to move, I as I Googled intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, as you started talking about it, I noticed one of the things
Internal
it
versus
says.
external. Yeah, that
No,
would
no,
have been
I
fine.
understand it. I just was curious if one is better than the other. If there is a healthier way to get motivated. And my concern was thinking about myself. So for one, on Google, it says neither intrinsic nor extrinsic motivation is better than the other. For, I guess, if we're going to use this for the audience, I haven't even started the episode, but maybe we will use this. Here are some examples of intrinsic motivation: reading a book about a subject you're interested in, putting together a puzzle because you enjoy the challenge, playing sports because you enjoy how they make you feel, studying because you're curious about the topics. Some examples of extrinsic motivation are reading a book to learn a required skill, putting together a puzzle because you want to win a prize, competing for a trophy or a prize. So, like, what my concern, I guess, is I naturally start to think about my need to please others and my need for validation from others. And that's something that I think I grew up with. I think part of it comes from being in a family where my father was a very high achiever and,
yeah, of course,
had high standards for us. Granted, I don't think he actually had as high standards for us as we created in our own minds. I think his perspective was always just do something you love and put your all into it.
Yeah, right.
As long as it's a good thing, don't do bad things.
Yeah, right. Like as long as it's not meth,
sure. As long as it's not meth.
Right.
Great example. I think that's the exact example he used when he was teaching us as kids.
Yeah,
no,
as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I think part of the challenge though is when you see someone who is a high performer, you then naturally think like, okay, I won't get approval unless I can perform at that high of a level. And so I think I naturally ingrained myself with this kind of extrinsic motivation where it was always like, I need to do this to accomplish X. It was never just a natural born curiosity. I struggle at being naturally curious about something and then just picking up a book and reading about it because I want to learn about it.
Right.
If I'm picking up a book to read it, to learn something, it's because there's a means to an end. There's something I am trying to understand so that I can accomplish X, Y, or Z, or so that I can beat this person, or so that I can prove someone wrong. That is kind of how my brain has been wired. I don't know if you feel differently.
I mean, I think that actually it does tie to Freud in some senses of you saying like what's better versus what's not. Because like I think that nothing is, everything is on a spectrum, first of all, right? And second of all, like nothing is by itself good. Well, meth by itself is fairly bad. But, as it relates to business or as it relates to, making sort of the right decisions for your life, like it's all subjective based on your goals, right? I mean, like I said before, there's nothing wrong with having big goals. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be, I mean, part of the rub for you, right, is like you said just a second ago about your dad. Like you've got you're Jerry Rice's son. Like you're you're in the same industry and you're living in you're not you're in a shadow whether you want to be or not, and those were choices that you made because you enjoy the business, and it that's something. I think the business is terrible, you love the business, like that's cool, but it's
you think the business is terrible. You've
oh my
made
god,
a life
I think
for
brokering
yourself
freight is about the worst. I think being a truck driver is probably the worst job in the world. The second worst job I think is probably being a freight broker. And
perspective
I mean, I think like,
is everything here.
I think we make it bad.
We're gonna have
ourselves.
to get into that.
but yeah, I mean, I think that what is right or wrong or what is better or worse all depends on what your goals are. If you're trying to make like an upper middle class income or a middle class income and be home every day and like that's what's going to and you don't care necessarily, like your legacy is your children, etc., like that's cool. And that's good for that's good for people. And then what decisions they make and what's best for them versus for motivation, for life choices. Again, for freight brokerage, like if you're going to be, I'm big on technology, but you don't have to do anything. It's just, it all depends on what your business goals are. I think you can do more with your business. Doesn't matter. Like there's one of our customers, big multi-billion-dollar freight brokerage, right? And I think the management team is totally screwed this whole thing up. But they're fine. And like they're making money and they're fine and they're going to trade. They're private equity owned. They'll trade again and everything will be fine and everybody will make their money. And I just look at it and go, you're not doing everything with this opportunity that you could. What's wrong with you? But they're okay. And that's okay. And I think that to your comment from a minute ago about like what's better or worse, it doesn't matter. There's no objective standard. It only matters like how truly does it map to what you're trying to accomplish? And so for you, I think that you care. The things that I've always really respected about you once I got to know you, right? Because like I thought you and I would be like cats and dogs when we first met. And I think I've told you this before, but if I haven't, I thought we'd be like cats and dogs. But you really you genuinely care. Like you genuinely care in a way that is pretty rare especially for leaders to care about their people and their vendors. Like you care about money. Like, okay, right. You care about money, but you didn't care about money at the expense of, your soul or like what it meant for you were always like, you're the type of leader. And I loved this about you. You're like, I want to pay my people more. I want to find a way to pay my people more money. I want reasons to pay them more. I want reasons I want to take care of my carriers, right? Like, and I want to pay them. I want them to make money. I don't believe in this whole, like the best carrier is the one you put out of business yesterday. And because of that, like that's a different, so like you being extrinsically motivated is better. If you tried to become intrinsically motivated, it would probably, you'd lose your edge. You'd lose everything. It makes you.
I don't know. I don't. Maybe we're connecting dots that are challenging to connect, or that don't connect as linearly as we're connecting them. And maybe it's my own misunderstanding. So I appreciate everything you just said. I do believe that part of, to respond to some of that, I think some of it is we were very mission driven, and I'm trying to think of a why to give the audience that would help someone in a similar position. But I just remember as we were starting the company, we were so clear about wanting to create the best possible experience for our people, for our drivers, and for the shippers. And we like obsessed over that concept, as simple as it sounds. But it is what would eventually, 2 years, 3 years down the road, lead to me having a conversation with someone like you as we're getting to know each other. And I'm contemplating, how do we work together? And, maybe I'm trying to help you understand what we're trying to do here. And I might say something like, I'm trying to figure out a way to pay our people more on this XYZ, or I'm trying to make sure that we don't put carriers out of business. It does all come back to that kind of mission-driven mindset that we had that was centered around creating that best experience for people and carriers and shippers. But when I think about who I was and how I was in the business, I think that some of my extrinsic motivation and my need for validation and approval from people, I think that hurt me in places. I think it forced me, it created situations where I was short-sighted or acting with the wrong driver or motivator.
Of course it did.
And so like, I think if for me, it's like, I think there's a insecurity, a ego issue that has created this need for love from the outside, that if I could get better, and this is something I've worked with my therapist on for over a year, is like loving myself and feeling like I'm enough today. I think that could lead to more intrinsic motivation if I could just let go of the care of what other people think.
For sure.
And if I could get to that place, I think I might be a better leader end to end, and not just in pockets here where I'm thinking very clearly and articulating.
Well, it's about balance. Like the whole point is, like there's a reason that yin and yang is a phrase, right? And like there's a reason that symbol looks the way that it does, because it's all about balance. Yeah. And if you over-index one direction or the other, again, like that's what's bad, right? Like what's bad is going, and that's that's something that you and I are naturally wired. This is why I thought we'd be cats and dogs, because we're both naturally wired that way, right? Like it is just, there's two settings. There's on and there's off, and that's it, right? We were just talking about that as related to going to the gym and stuff, right? It's on or it's off, and I think it's all about balance. And you're right, like, but all and I also struggle loving myself, and I also struggle thinking I'm good enough and whatever. But I also recognize that like the only way you learn things is by making mistakes, and like you've made high profile mistakes. I mean, I've said this about Convoy, right? Like at some level, and I've said this to Dan Lewis, and I'm sure you've had similar conversations with him. It's like you just failed. Like you objectively succeeded at some really great stuff, right? And like, but the only reason you get the hate, et cetera, that you got or you get is because you failed in a really public way, because you tried to do something great, because you reached for something great, because you tried to do more, et cetera. And it's all, and there's a lot of these people who are sitting behind their keyboards, pounding out on LinkedIn, talking shit about Convoy. And that's just one example, that haven't done anything with their life, that are like 40-year-old or, that are 40-year veteran, like account managers, and haven't tried to do anything. It's not to say they haven't done anything with their life, but professionally, they haven't tried to do anything big. They haven't tried to do anything great. And it's like that's very, and so Andrew, like you've made mistakes because you tried to do something. I often say the only way I know anything is because I just made the same mistakes, or I made the mistakes, and I just kept and I also just kept making them, and I just was like too strong headed to. And like you, luckily, were able to make some of them and adjust on the fly because you're smarter than I am. But like at the end of the day, I mean, like you have to make mistakes. If you didn't make mistakes, you're not trying, is the point, right? Like I had three rules for business. It started as 3 rules for brokering freight, right? Most fun wins, which I always failed at because I hate freight brokerage. To constant vigilance, and number 3 was get uncomfortable.
What
right?
was
like,
number 2? Hold on. What was number 2?
Constant vigilance.
Okay.
Right? Like stay on top of your shit. Know what's going on. Don't micromanage your team members, but keep an eye on the things that matter for you, right? Like control. If you've ever read the Amazon Way, like I think the phrase that he uses is like control your contingencies or something.
Mm-hmm.
But get uncomfortable is the third one, because it's like if you're not pushing yourself, if you're only doing what's comfortable, you're not going to get anywhere. I struggle with the same things that you do, bro. Like that. Like I said, I mean, it's very, and I think that I'm just striving for more balance. Like, don't be entirely extrinsically motivated, but if you went the other direction, you're going to lose your edge. You're not going to be you anymore. And you're also going to be unhappy about that.
Yep.
Because you're not living authentically.
I'm with you. I'm picking up what you're
That's
putting
what I
out.
think.
Yep. All right. We should start the show. This is all in the show. We're keeping this in. We're keeping this in. But I got to do like this whole, start the show gig.
Go ahead. Yeah, you got to read your sponsors out. Go ahead.
Well, what's interesting is I historically don't read the sponsors. I never want to disrupt. My goal is to create the best conversation possible, and to do that with
you've done a great job,
minimal distractions as possible. And so my concern was always, if I read the ads in the middle of the conversation, if I stop a conversation to read an ad, I'm risking diminishing the quality of the conversation.
For sure.
However, I don't feel like I don't like the monotony of how I've done the sponsors in the past. So this is going to be the first time I'm going to live read the sponsorship. We're going to do it now. We're going to start the show, and then
is it Rapido? Are we live reading Rapido?
We're live reading Rapido. So
Danny, I got to say really quickly, Danny and Roberto have become 2 of my best friends.
This is a good reason for me to do it this way, because it gets them extra.
I didn't know they existed until you mentioned them. Like, you were the one who introduced me to them, and they have become 2 of my absolute best friends. I absolutely love those guys more than anything. They're just great humans. All right, so read it.
No, they're both great guys. I mean, Danny. So let's. All right. Friends, read it.
Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver. I'm joined today by Ryan Schreiber, a friend of mine, big cat guy. He's the chief growth officer at Metaphora, and he's got a lot of brokerage experience. Granted, if you've been listening for the last, I don't know how many of the pre-recorded or pre-conversation we're going to keep in the episode, but enough of it, you'll hear that he hates freight brokerage. but he's a freight broker at heart and a lawyer as well. And now he's a consultant. Those are things that people love. Think the three jobs people love the most.
Name the top three jobs that people love.
Consultants, lawyers, and freight brokers.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
This guy is going to be honest and great to work with. No, I'm just kidding. So he is a great guy. He's a good friend and a friend of many in the industry. So we're going to start the show. First, we are going to do our first live ad read. Historically, my sponsor read has been before the show, but we're doing it live. So we are sponsored by Rapido Solutions, led by Danny Frisco and Roberto Acaza, two guys who I have known for a very long time. I went to college with Roberto, was in the same fraternity, and Danny and I worked together at Coyote. I almost hired him at Molo as like the fifth employee, to be honest. But he pursued his own entrepreneurial dreams with Roberto, started Rapido Solutions, who connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently, operate on par with U.S.-based teams, and deliver superior customer service. They work with companies from all sides of the industry, including freight brokers, carriers, logistics, tech companies. They build out teams with roles across customer, carrier, sales, and support, back office administration, and tech services. Whatever you need, they can help you. So check them out at gorapido.com. I have personal experience work with them for my time at Molo, and they did a great job for us. So worth a look. And that's it from our ad read. Those guys are keeping the lights on for us, paying the bills. And now back to the show. Ryan, all right. We've already spent 10 to 15 minutes jiving on intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, on life.
Mindset. It's all about mindset, man.
Mindset. Let's focus on you, though, for a little bit. Let's get this conversation going. So correct me if I'm wrong, but your background – and we're going to jump into this, but your background is you went to law school, became a lawyer for a brief amount of time, and then for whatever reason ended up at Echo as a sales rep.
That's right.
From there,
technically, I became a lawyer for a short amount of time. Like I never actually practiced. So I graduated during the Great Recession of I used to be able to say the last recession, but then there was like the small COVID recession, and now we may or may not be in a recession now or soon. But so I graduated during quote unquote the Great Recession of the housing crisis. And like I just couldn't get people to talk to me. I couldn't get job interviews. Couldn't get anything. So I met a guy named Ryan Kramer, who now works at I think he's at XPO. His company got bought by XPO. I think he's still there. But and he went to Michigan State. Which is where I went for law school. And one of my classmates was his cousin, whatever, gets me an interview at Echo. And so I interviewed with Noam Frankel, and Noam was the one who brought me into the space, who and I remember sitting across the desk from him and being him saying like he had to interview me at Echo. Like I'm sure he had to sign off on it because like my background was because I couldn't even get jobs like waiting tables and stuff, right? Because everybody's like, this guy's a lawyer, he's going to be a lawyer.
Ain't nobody wants your hair to fall into the food, the beard hair.
Yeah, that's right. They were like, "Can you wear a hairnet?"
I wouldn't hire you at a serving job.
No, of course not. I mean, I personally wouldn't hire me to do anything, to be honest with you. But people keep doing it, so I'm happy about it.
That's like one of my low key biggest fears is someone else's hair getting in my food. When you find someone else's hair in your food, you're just like, oh, this is awful. Not to distract
my own hair getting in my food is a problem from time to time, and it's also gross. I'm just going to be honest with you.
That's also worse when you get the food, you see a hair, and you're like, could that be my hair that's in there? It looks
luckily
brown.
Like my hair is pretty.
Yours is pretty clear.
I'm a redhead, very rarely, but anyway, I remember Noam sitting across the desk from me and being like, if you're just going to do this for like a couple months and dip, like this isn't that kind of job. And I was like, nah, man, I'm here for the long haul. And I distinctly remember sitting there just being like, well, I've given up on life. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. And it was bad. I mean, it was a tough time. So Echo felt like from day one, like failure, like you were saying, like, why don't you like freight brokerage? Echo could have been a great place to be. It was a terrible place for me because I was just so negative about it. And to the point about mindset, like, I had felt like day one, like I had failed. I had felt like I had failed because like I'm afraid, I had spent $200,000 to go to law school and I have all this student loan debt or whatever. And I'm like slinging, and I never wanted to be in sales. Like I still don't want to be in sales. and I am, and I'm good at it, but I don't, and so like it felt like failure, man. So anyway, so yeah, that's how I started at Echo. I just kind of fell backwards into it, needed a job, and then just tried to make the best of it, in a manner of speaking.
And you were a customer facing sales rep?
Yeah, that's right. So like, we did the whole backhaulers 3-month training thing. And then when I hit the floor, I was a customer sales rep. Although again, I worked with Gnome. And so he had a couple of, like, he was, an executive. And so he had a couple of accounts that he still minded. So I kind of had I had a couple of accounts that I like worked more in an account management context but also was like, cold calling and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. And from there, so you bounced around a little bit from there. So you went from Echo to Optimal Freight, another brokerage where you were the GM for a couple of years.
Yeah, so we started that. Yeah, so Gnome and I left Echo, and then Gnome left, and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to start this. Do you want to do it?" I'm like, "Sure." So I was like sitting on the floor slinging freight with my laptop, just like day one, getting the stuff off the ground.
So Optimal Freight was what you guys were starting that as a brokerage from scratch.
Yeah.
Was there an asset business tied to it, or it was just its own?
No, just
deal?
Pure non-asset.
And what was that? So what was the time frame when you started that business?
2011 or 10, something like that. I was only at Echo for about 11 months. So like 2010, I think, or 11. Yeah. And then we were there for a few years doing that.
How many people were at Optimal when you started it?
I think we were at like 25 when I left. Talk about like learning bad habits and stuff. I love Gnome, and you may have a different relationship with Gnome. I love Gnome, and like he's done everything for me in my career. I've done everything for me. Gnome has done everything for me in my career. Like I would not be here without him. Also, and he admits this readily. Like I learned a lot of really bad people habits from Gnome, and like, we could have done something even more special at Optimal, and we got in the way, and he got in the way, and I one of the you talked about making mistakes. Like one of the mistakes I made was like I didn't understand the concept of like leadership is not about a job title. Leadership is not about, it's about leading. And like I didn't recognize that people look to me as a leader, or I didn't realize there were people that I did not realize looked to me as a leader because I had been there from the beginning, and I had started the company, and I knew, I had all of the institutional knowledge about how things worked, and I had the relationships across the business, quote unquote. It's a small business, but I poisoned the well. Like I did, like, and that was a mistake. And I for a long time, I blamed other people for why we weren't more successful there. But like I was part of the problem, and I didn't realize that for a long time. So talk about making mistakes. That's one of the big leadership things that I learned is like lead. It doesn't matter what your job title is. It doesn't matter. It could be your first day on the job, but you can be a leader.
Can you elaborate a little bit? Like when you say you poisoned the well, can we jump in a little bit with some detail, what that looks like, what failing in leadership looks like in your opinion? And it doesn't have to just be from Optimal, but yeah, I'd love to. Let's just talk about how shitty we've been as leaders for a little while.
Yeah, totally. I
promise I'll participate. I've got plenty of ammo.
It's good. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I focus on problems more on solutions, and I didn't have a good framework for like how to think about processing those vis-a-vis like personal relationships. So like I heard this thing maybe a couple years ago about grief. And it was talking about how like when you think about grief, there are like circles of grief. So like someone dies. And like there are these concentric circles of how close you are to that person, right? So like let's say, God forbid, my wife died, right? Like in the innermost circle is me and her parents. In the next circle are like my parents and her siblings, or maybe her siblings are in the inner circle, but like just let's say my parents, and outside and her friends, and then outside that circle, etc. And the concept was like, you can never, like you should never complain inward, right? So like people in the third circle shouldn't talk to people in the first circle and be like, I'm really struggling. I can't believe this is happening. Woe is me. Like you need to like you can complain outward because like, right. They're too, I can't
Understood.
take on that burden as the first circle.
Yeah, you've got
And I
more
think
on
the
your
same
plate.
was, I think, yeah. And I think the same is true professionally, right? Like when I say I poisoned the well, it's like, I didn't recognize again, like that I should have been a leader and I should have like found a more healthier channel to deal with my frustrations. So I, instead I would share my frustrations openly with like, you know, with people who were my friends or were friendly instead of trying to like keep those people on the ship, put on a good face, you know, and then work through those problems other ways, right?
Yeah.
And then again, also focusing on problems over solutions. Like I very, again, very toxically, I'd be like, this isn't my job. I actually think saying this isn't my job is is a very important thing to say in business, but it's how you say it, right? And so like I would say toxically, this isn't my job. Go talk to somebody else.
Yeah, right.
Go talk to Noam. Go make him solve the problem. You know,
There's two thoughts there, right? I mean, on one front, it's establishing fair boundaries for yourself as a professional to say this isn't my job. Like you are asking me to do something that I'm not paid to do. And I think there's a way to say that tactfully that can be understood as a boundary set for you as an individual.
Well, I think it's both like, hey, hey, there's a problem here. Like, and if you're coming to me to solve this problem, like you don't have trust in the system or you don't have trust in a team member or you don't know what you're doing and we need to solve that problem. And I need to teach you to fish, perhaps. Or like a lot of times people use the like it's not my job thing because or the inverse of it's not my job because they want to micromanage their teammates or they want to undermine their team members, they want to undermine the system. And I think that those are like, and so again, I didn't focus on like, hey, okay, you don't know, let's solve this problem. You're coming to me to help you with this because I know the solution and I know the answer. And let's solve for this. Why are you not able to do this on your own? Why are you not getting the help you need? Like, let's go to, and if another leader is the problem, let's go to that leader and solve that problem. And instead of me being like, I don't want to deal with this, I'm unhappy, you go to that leader and you solve the problem yourself. Like, that's not the right solution. And sometimes you have to let people, sometimes you need to push people to fight their own battles, et cetera, right? And so, but again, it's all about balance. And as we were talking about earlier, and I never strove for that balance. I was just so upset and so frustrated by a number, you know, by my perception, to your point about perception, by my perception of where things were. And many of those things were more my fault than I realized. And that was a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake. I mean, you know, we ended up selling the business to, or, you know, ended up selling the business to Transport America. And so like, you know, it was a success story. Like that's not a, you know, or a TFI. But that's not a, so it's, you know, it's not all failure and success are on a spectrum, right? It just wasn't what we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
It wasn't Command. It wasn't Coyote. It wasn't backhaulers. It was.
I was just gonna say it's not binary, right? I mean, you know, when you say that was a success story, it's like, okay, from starting from scratch to getting it to an acquisition is an I don't want to use the word optimal outcome. Maybe not optimal. Depends on numbers and such.
Right.
But it's okay. It could be great. It could be not so great. But as you think about yourself and your impact and, you know, your time at Optimal, it's like it's not necessarily binary to say, okay, we sold it, so that was a win. It's more like, you know, what was my impact on people? Yeah. How will I be remembered from those people? And I think one of the things that I mentally struggle with, that I think about a lot, and some of this is tied to going on LinkedIn and seeing all these, you know, influencers teaching everything under the sun, and everybody's perfect and everybody's humbled and doing great, whatever. But there's a lot of talk about leadership and what good leadership is like. And I just really struggle with the idea that leadership is binary and that you are a good leader or you are a bad leader. I don't believe that that is the case. I think that every day you are a bag of emotional chaos, and you have an operating system that, you know, guides you, and it's either guiding you into a positive energy and situation or potentially the opposite. And every day could be something else that is triggering that, whether it's you woke up and you had a great workout in the morning, you started your day great, you had a healthy breakfast, you had a good conversation with your wife, and boom, you're off to start your day, and you're walking into the workplace with clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. And you execute your plan to a T. You have 4 or 5 meetings that you show up to well, you listen well, you give good advice to your team. Boom, you had a great day as a leader. The next day, you stubbed your toe getting out of bed, your car wouldn't start, you showed up 15 minutes late to your workout, so you missed part of it, and your wife's pissed at you for this, your dog's shit in the house. And when you show up to work, your operating system is off because you didn't get the breakfast, and you're a little perturbed, and someone asks you a question right before a meeting and it pisses you off, and you respond curtly and frustratedly, and 3 more things happen, and boom, you were a bad leader that day. You couldn't check your emotional baggage at the door, and you came in short tempered and caused problems versus solutions. And it's like, over a period of time, you're going to have a lot of both of those. And at the end of the day, I think as a leader or as an individual, the best leaders are the ones who can kind of check the emotional baggage, come in with like a kind of come into work every day with like a clear mind, and like the ability to navigate whatever challenges are thrown at them, and to do so while thinking about the big picture of whatever their mission is and applying that.
I think that, and you know, I don't disagree with you. Like, I think that's the standard that we're striving toward. And there are some people who are just like maybe better equipped than others at that. I mean, also, like, it's really great that you had Andrew Vogrich, right, with you at Molo, because like you, like me, are a person who is, we are visionary leaders, right? We're people who like to chart a course and be like, this is where we're going. This is the North Star. Let me get everybody going toward that direction. And the minutia of that, the day-to-day sort of like management of that is where you and I really struggle. And so I think what you just described is like what a leader, quote unquote, should be, is actually talking about the type of leader that Andrew is, right? Like, and he's incredible at that, right? And like that's
you're
what
talking about Matt Vogrich.
Sorry.
Yes,
Matt,
I'm Andrew.
Matt.
You're talking
I kept
about Matt.
saying Andrew.
Yes, no, you're right. I'm picking. I'm now.
Matt
I hear what you're saying.
Vogrich. Yeah. For the just like let's use AI to edit in me saying Matt every single
it's
time.
It's all good. We're human.
But that's right. So you're describing the type of leader that Matt is, right? And like, and I think that, so I think you're underselling the type of leader that you are, right? Which is, it's necessary. And I think that both of those things are important. And I think where I fell down for a lot of my career is I didn't, until I had somebody like Matt, which for me is Peter Rentschler, who could help me be a better, like who could create a safe, like who made me feel safe, or who made me feel okay. You know, the problem was I showed up. I didn't show up every day to be better. Cause I think that to the point about like, hey, you know, the best leaders show up this way. Really, it's like, you're maybe equipped for that, or you're maybe not. Just, are you trying to do better than you did yesterday? And are you recognizing, and do you recognize that improvement is nonlinear? You know, okay. I remember I got a text message maybe 6 or 8 months ago from somebody that we had hired. And she said something to me that was like, hey, you sent this email and it like made me feel like I was an executive assistant, and I'm not. And I'm like, I had sent the email from my phone really quickly, like whatever. And my immediate reaction, I just got like super pissed immediately.
Like, I wasn't thinking, like, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. In the past, I would have said exactly what you said. oh, I want like that, like you're being ridiculous, whatever.
Yeah.
But I took a breath and I was like, you know what? Like, I should have slowed down. Like, this happened because I was trying to move too fast because I was doing, my Ryan thing, which is being in 100 places at once. And I could see how especially because you're new, especially because we all deal with imposter syndrome, especially because we all deal with, you know what, you were right. And I will learn from this experience. Like, I'm not going to become an entirely different human being, but like, I appreciate you sharing with me how you needed me to show up in that moment. And I need to do my part as a leader to try and meet you in the middle. Maybe not all the way where you are, because I might not be able to do that. And that's like, I'm just, without giving up who I am, but I need to try and meet you somewhere in the middle. And so I think that you're underselling two things about yourself. One is the visionary part and how you need that and how you need to get, and then two, like, really it's in aggregate over the course of time, are you showing up better? And you're right, it's not binary. Like we're talking about Dan Lewis in Convoy. Like, Convoy was a success and a failure objectively. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add there, piggyback off, is in thinking about your situation with your coworker that had just started, is I think, and this reminds me of a book called The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic, which is about kind of the roles. There's something called the drama triangle, and it's like these different roles that you can play. The roles in the drama triangle are the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. And these roles like apply in any situation that you're in. Specific, the example uses is a perfect one where you needed something done. You sent an email to a coworker.
I was trying to be empowering. I was trying to say, hey, this is yours, take it on. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And they felt like you were being, treating them like an executive assistant. Right. And that's just, that's how they felt as a result of what you sent. There's a flip of this triangle. That's kind of the empowerment dynamic. And that's the creator, the challenger, and the coach. And my point in bringing this up is, at the end of the day, if in any situation you're at in work or conflict is really the right, because it doesn't just apply to work, it applies in your personal life too. But if in any situation where there's conflict, you can approach the situation focusing on yourself and seeing your ownership in that situation, you can come out on top and be way further ahead as a leader, as a coworker, as a partner, whatever it may be. And it's a choice you make. And most people don't actually make the choice consciously. They are just very locked into a kind of victim mentality where it's like, hey, I know that I didn't have bad intentions when I sent that email. So you're in the wrong. I'm the victim here. And I'm the person. I'm persecuting you because you don't understand my tone. And then I'm just trying to get the job done. I'm the victim because I'm just working as hard as I can and moving as fast as I can. Or you could play the rescuer. So like, you know what, I'll do it for you so you don't have to feel like that. Right. The alternative is like, as a creator, it's saying, you know what, you're right. Like, we haven't worked together. I don't understand how you like to be communicated to. I didn't communicate to you that I'm in a rush, that I'm got these things going on and I'm just trying to get this done. My point in bringing this up is it's just like, at the end of the day, like, conflict always comes down to, are you willing to take accountability for your role in a situation? And what is the mindset you're taking as you approach said situation? Because most people live in this dreaded drama triangle where they're constantly playing one of three roles, being a victim, a persecutor, or a rescuer. And those are all negative roles.
Right.
If you can shift to the paradigm where you look at the entire world through this kind of positive mindset, where everyone is capable of being a creator, a coach, or a challenger, and you challenge people, you coach people, or you co-create with them or create for yourself, the world is a better place for you. And this is not an easy thing to figure out.
No.
This is something I'm on my third time I'm now listening to the book every morning after I go to the gym. I get in the sauna for 15 minutes and I just throw the AirPods in and listen to this book. And it's really hard to apply it day to day because it takes this mental shift. And I come from a place of, especially the last year and a half, where I haven't been working and I've been frustrated. I look at every situation and like a woe is me. And it's like,
I'm sure.
getting screwed here by this guy. This guy's doing this to me. This person's doing this. It's unhelpful. It creates this constant negative feedback loop in your mind. I don't know if any of this.
I mean, everybody shows up. Like, I think the thing that again, talking about being sort of like ways in which I poisoned the well, or like wasn't the best leader I could be. Like, I also have started, everybody shows up with, they're not NPCs, right? Like they have baggage, they have experience, they have things that have come, for me, for instance, right? Like that experience of like being unemployed after law school and no one being willing to talk to me, what have you. Like, I have a lot of fear around how that was a really negative experience. Like, and it showed up for me in two ways. One, I've always been a lot slower to let people go than maybe I should be, right? Like fire them, because I know how terrible it is to be. And then what I end up doing is taking on, to your point about rescue, where I take on more on myself. Like, did absolutely everything feasible, not what's reasonable, not did I provide them the support, not is this a good fit or marriage, and then the other thing is, I also don't I'm also very untrusting, or have been historically very untrusting of other leaders in my business, because I don't want to find myself in that, especially like, leaders above me. Like, I haven't wanted to, or like co-owners, for instance, like with Spartan, like I just didn't trust them. I didn't listen. Like I didn't, and everybody shows up with their own thing. And you have to work through that together. I mean, to your point about like, hey, I don't know how you want to be communicated with. Again, like I think there's a balance to be struck between saying like, hey, you're asking for things that are unreasonable. And if you absolutely need that thing and I absolutely can't deliver you that thing, maybe this is a bad marriage. But we have to work through these things together and build trust. And maybe if this person like she had come off of two kind of consecutive work situations where like she really was treated like and not like an executive, but like an executive assistant by other leaders, and like because and who knows why, like, but that's what she was working through, and I didn't know that, and if I had come into it kind of guns blazing, to your point about, and I think that's important. Like, we have to take people where they are and where they come to us, and then again, being a good leader, what I've learned about being a leader is like, okay, I'm going to react emotionally to things. That's how I am. So like, what I need to do is, what I'm fighting against is the immediate response, the immediate reaction, the like, hey, let me take a second here. And so I've started asking myself, like, well, what if I'm, so like for me, the mindset shift is just, the first thing I ask myself is like, well, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I am the asshole? Right? Like, because usually I am, and
but are you capable of asking yourself that in the moment when you're reacting emotionally?
Only because again, it's about improvement over time, Andrew. Like, what I've done is, like, when you first do it, of course not. And like what at first it's like, you only see it in retrospect, like, right. And then what you start doing is, or like, this has been my lived experience, then I start seeing it more and more in retrospect. So then that time collapses, right? So like at first, maybe it's like 4 hours later, I'll realize like, oh, I shouldn't have reacted that way. And then I start noticing that like every day there was 2 or 3 of these things. Then the time gets closer and closer, right? Then I recognize it 3 hours, 2 hours, 45 minutes, half an hour, 5 minutes. And then eventually, and again, it's not every single time, then I start catching it right in the moment and saying like, okay, and you just training your mindset. At least that, again, that's been my experience. When I was a couple years ago, I joke about brokerage being the worst, although I do think it is the worst. This is maybe 10 or so years ago. People used to call, I'd get call from customer and they, oh, how are you doing? And I would jokingly say, everything is terrible all the time. I'm a freight broker, right? Like, it is. And I was so, and like at that period of my life, I was so stressed and I was just whatever. And so I started saying, and I just realized it one day. So I made a conscious decision that I was going to say, from The Big Lebowski, everything is fine and nothing is fucked, when they started answering me this question, right? And they started asking me this question. And I just noticed that like, I just started feeling less stressed out because like I was conditioning my thoughts the same way. And so, yeah, I can do that in the moment, but it's because I've spent 5 years of learning. Like Peter, this is another way Peter's been a great partner for me. Like he's created an environment where like, hey man, like you made a bad choice, but like, it's okay. Like, or I've learned from him how to do some of these things. And he is also he is naturally wired very similarly to you and me. And so he's had to learn these things. And it's been great. And because we have an ultimate trust with each other, like when we've brought in, there have been scenarios like I totally can identify where like we recently brought in somebody at an executive level who I can tell you definitively 5.5 years ago when I joined this company, if the same exact thing had happened, I would have gotten super defensive. I would have been, and I would have played the part, but like I, in my own mind, would have been like defensive and it would have showed up somehow. But like, I didn't, because I know that I trust that Peter's not going to screw me over. And if he does, he does. Like, okay, but he's probably not going to. And so that's just continuing the journey and the repetitions is what has worked for me, Andrew. I think it'll work for you, man.
What, there's something I keep thinking about here in building teams. And, you and I are talking about what is one of our negative challenges, which is you and I have a history of responding emotionally to adverse situations. And that
or even good situations too, by the way. Like it's not great that we get so high sometimes too,
yeah,
right?
That's fair.
Like,
sure. And that's just an example for us that applies. And it can create a negative impact to people in our companies or whatever.
Spheres.
And everybody has something. In fact, everybody probably has multiple things that
for sure
that just are not their best characteristics. And they're things that, yes, either they are conscious of and working on, or unconscious of and need to be made conscious of, whatever. What I'm curious about is the best teams are the ones where there is the yin and yang, where the players on each team understand the positives and the drawbacks or challenges that all the other players on the team have. And they learn how to coexist and work together and trust that people are getting better and working to get better. But how do you create that? And I'm thinking about like, you used the word vulnerable earlier. My wife recently just bought me this frame that's sitting next to my computer, actually, that I really like this quote. It's from Brene Brown, but vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. And when I bring that quote up, it has me just thinking about what we're talking about right now, because I feel like, you mentioned trust, and trust in my mind, or a definition I've read at some point, is something on the lines of taking something meaningful to yourself and making it vulnerable to the actions of another. That's trust, and like building trust on teams is going to come down to our ability to understand one another, to be vulnerable with one another and share the things that we are not great at, and work with one another to get better at them and coexist in spite of those things. And I'm just curious how you think about that is in companies you've worked with, in terms of the consulting you've done.
Yeah.
Like how do you create a really strong team that is vulnerable with one another, that trusts one another? Are there things you've seen that work, or things you've seen that don't work? Let's talk about that.
It always starts. So it's, I love those quotes that you shared. I'm listening to the Game of Thrones books, and there's one of the characters says, like one of the kids says to, it's in the first book, says to like the dad, Ned Stark, he's like, I can't be brave, I'm scared. And the dad says, you can only be brave when you are scared. Like, right? I mean, if there's not something on the line, you can't. So the vulnerability thing, right? Like making your actions vulnerable, or making yourself vulnerable to someone else's actions. Like you can't trust or be trusting if there's nothing on the line, if there are no consequences or repercussions to that, and negative to you, right? And so I think that's part of the reason you get really bad advice often, like, especially like, and I think this manifests itself a lot in freight brokerage and like a lot of really underperforming teams in freight brokerage. It all comes down to micromanaging the outcomes of other team members, right? Like, especially in the buy sell model, like carrier sales teams and customer sales teams, like if you can't, you put a load on the board and you don't, and you, no one's working on my freight or like, I can't believe that, there's not enough money in that load, et cetera. And so like, I think it's a problem. It all comes down to, but it all starts with, from what I've seen from high performing and low performing teams in my own businesses, and to your point from our customers, is it starts with self-awareness. Like I undoubtedly, like, because to your point too, like we talked a lot about how our like shortcomings manifest, and they're just like super obvious because, right, they're on the surface.
Yep.
And there are a lot of shortcomings from other folks that are just under the surface and that are less obvious, and that just kind of show up in ways that are really sort of hard. And it's not insidious in the sense that like they're doing anything negative, but it's insidious in the sense that like it's hard to kind of pull on that thread and realize like, oh, I'm having a negative outcome over there. Like this started with good intentions, but really it's turned out to be micromanaging or what have you. And so I think it definitely all starts with getting to know yourself, because how can I communicate to you what I need if I don't know what I need, if I don't know me? And like, I can't, it's unfair for me to accept or to think that you will suss out what I need from you, right? Like I have to do the work myself first. And so I think that's a really important part of that, is like the willingness to look at yourself and say like, and then like I was talking about in the prep, I've been going to counseling for a while, and my challenge is dealing with like, how do I like work on the parts, find that balance, because some of the things that make me great to the extent that I am, which is minimal, how do I keep those parts but solve the like harsh edges of it without losing its core? Because that's a problem. And that's true of everyone, right? Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Like, how do you blunt some of the negative edges of that without getting rid of like what makes you incredible and have built an incredible business, right? And so I think that from what I've seen from across the business, it's like the teams that have, the leadership teams that have the most self-awareness are the ones that are then able to build trust, to challenge each other, to hold each other accountable. Like I said, like our business has been flat to slight growth for the last 2 years, which is not where I want to be. And like our chief people officer has looked at me and gone, well, like, Ryan, what are you doing to change that? And she can say that to me because I know she's not coming from a place of blame. She's coming from a place of education because she wants to help, because we've done the work. She's done the work to know what she needs. She's actually asking me because she knows what I need to be successful. And I think it really starts there. And then you have to, like, if you have people who aren't willing to buy into that concept, you need to move away from them regardless of how great they are at everything else, blah, 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 right? Like if they're not willing to be a part of that team and do that work, move on, right? Like you and Vogrich, like you guys had that because you had built that relationship. You had built that trust. He could call you an asshole. You could call him an asshole. Like, and it came from a place of love, and it came from a place of betterment for the outcomes that you were striving to, right? And you could hear it because you had done that work together. So I think that being willing to get rid of people or being willing to move on from those people is the other key. And no one is above the law, right? So everyone has to do that work.
Yep.
I'll say to Peter a lot of times, Peter will be like, can I do this? And I'll be like, you're the CEO. You can do whatever you want. And I say it jokingly, right? It's your company. You can do whatever you want, man. But he is in the system with us. Like he is opted into the system with us. He's not going to come off the top rope and do whatever he wants because it's his company.
Well, he can, but he knows he's creating a new baseline. And if he does that, he's now creating an environment where people will always feel like their work is only good enough until Peter jumps off the top rope and decides
that's right.
It's not.
And we haven't always, and admittedly, like, and he and I, again, this is one ways in which we're very similar. He and I have not always been the best at, and we're still not the best at not doing that. I mean, there are times where we come off the top rope and we're just like, this is all wrong. You guys fucked this whole thing up. But what we do now is we go back and we say, okay, how did I not set you up for success in this moment? Right? How did I drop the ball in terms of communicating to you my expectations, or transitioning this to you, or giving you the information I had about the client that would have been useful for you to know to not miss the mark? And then if you still missed it, and I did, if I look back and said I did all of those things, and again, I said earlier, a way this can show up as toxic is trying to take it too far and say, did I do absolutely everything I can? Because there's a reasonableness aspect to this too, right? Like I have to reasonably, I can't become an entirely different person. I can't take the whole thing out of it. But that's the key, is it starts with doing the work on yourself and recognizing that you're also human.
Yeah, that self-awareness piece is something I'm stuck on. I mean, I think it's a really critical component to building a strong team, is having people who are willing to be, I can't think of the word, introspective is the word I'm thinking of, and willing to look at themselves. I think take ownership in their role in all of this, in co-creating whatever the experience is that your end team creates for customers, clients, whoever. There's something that my executive coach had me do early. So this was maybe 2 years ago. This was before we were acquired, actually. So it's 3 years ago. It was called a Leadership 360 profile. And essentially every one of our executives, we had, I think, 8 people on our executive team, all 7 others filled out this survey about me. I don't know if it had 100 questions. It had a lot. And it basically dug into every characteristic of myself, and gave a really healthy measurement of where I was doing well and where I was falling short. And one of the things I appreciate about our team was they were pretty honest, and there was a lot of shit I was falling short on.
Yeah, of course.
And it was really how, one of the things you said is like, or that resonated, is it feels like typically there's a yin and yang in our qualities, where like there's a great aspect to a quality, but if it goes too far, it can become a negative pretty quickly, or there's just kind of the light and the shadow with respect to everything. And one of the,
do you remember the show Clarissa Explains It All? Or are you too young for that?
I might be too young, or I just never watched it.
All right, that's fine. So like Nickelodeon on like Friday nights started this lineup where they had like kids shows on Friday night, like later in the night, and one of them was the show Clarissa Explains It All. Melissa Joan Hart, I know you know she was the main character, and there was an episode where her parents go out of town and she's like left in charge of her and her brother, and so she's like, I'm going to do everything I love to the extreme, and so she eats a ton of ice cream, and then her stomach hurts. I love ice cream. Ice cream's incredible. I'm not lactose intolerant, thank God. But like, so if you are out there and you're lactose intolerant, pick a different example of a thing you love. But like, if you ate an entire gallon of ice cream in one sitting, you're going to feel bad. And that's it. Everything is 2 sides of a same coin, right? Like there's a light and a shadow to it, exactly like you just said. Everything is 2 sides of the same coin. It makes you great and it holds you back. And all you can do as a human, all you can do, I think, as a person or a leader, is try and find the balance. Like, and it's really interesting. I'm going to send you this thing that, do you know Nate Schutz is?
Yeah.
So Nate sent this thing to me. It's called Positive Intelligence, and it's about your saboteurs. And it was one of those personality profiles that, but it was all about what's holding you back. And there's like 10 different saboteurs and like how they're holding. Take it. I think you'll really find it interesting, but.
Yeah, I've done this. So,
you have? Okay.
My saboteurs,
mine was so spot on. It was like unbelievable.
Yeah. So the saboteurs that, and the way this was described to me by my executive coach, because I did this positive intelligence quiz or survey or whatever it is essentially, it's like, imagine there's a board of directors sitting at a table in your brain, and they are operating you as a company or as a system. And these saboteurs all have a seat at the table, and based on your personality, some of them have a way bigger seat at the table than others. Some, don't even have a voice. Others are very loud. My biggest ones were hyperachiever, and hyperachiever was far and away the biggest one. And I think
Interesting.
Controller was right behind it.
Hyperachiever was my number 2. Restless was my number 1. I was a 10 out of 10 on restless, and I was a 9.4 out of hyperachiever.
Got it.
It was like just through the roof. And it checked out. Like when I read these examples, I'm like, oh my God, this is so me.
But the point in these are characteristics of ourselves that alter a situation a bit. And the right way to think about it is, in any situation that comes up, how you view that situation is slightly altered by who has the kind of controlling seats at the board table with respect to your saboteur. So hyperachiever, it's like,
that was the comparative success thing you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a problem for me that dates back to, again, my childhood and having a highly competent or capable, successful father, where it's like achievement is the basis for which we allot respect, and it's not right. It's not the way I think that. I don't think it's the healthiest way for me to think about things. And it's something that I work on with my coach, because it's like, it's not productive. But yeah, I lost my train of thought there. So I'll shut up for a second, let you riff.
That's okay. I gotta go. I don't want to cut this out. Like, this is like I'm really enjoying this conversation, but I gotta go try and make some money. So unfortunately, I think we have to leave it at that, but I would highly recommend anybody take a look at the saboteurs thing, because I think in terms of understanding, it was revelatory for me, because everything's more about, like, a lot of things are about like there are a lot of personality profiles that help you understand kind of like how you show up positively, if you will, or like what this one really helped me understand what my motivators are that are holding me back. Like, so I was really high on restlessness and hyperachiever, which means, right, which like maps perfectly. I really struggle to feel contentment. I really struggle to feel like I've had any kind of success. And so I'm always restless, and and my measures of success are ridiculously high. When I was in high school, I'm from Tampa, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers went up for sale, like, because Hugh Culverhouse had died and the Glazers bought it. And they sold for like 170. In that day, I think I was like in 11th grade or something like that. I was like, my life goal is to buy the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's my life goal. You know how far away I am from that, Andrew? Like, I am so, but that's what I'm building toward,
There's
I know
still
there
time.
is. Of course there is. But I also just turned 40. And so, like, it doesn't feel like there's as much time. But that's what's always circling around my mind and my, in my life. And so anyway, I think that it's that one was really helpful for me for that reason, because I really understood like how these things that can, again, light and dark, right? Those are also the two things that make me work incredibly hard and make me show up incredibly, reliably for my team members, right? But it also makes me make bad decisions sometimes, because it makes me not show up reliably for my team members, because I take on 15 things I should have said no to.
Yep.
So that's that. Thanks for having me on, dude.
You got to run?
Yeah, I gotta go. I gotta go do a call. Which I have a feeling is going to be not very productive, unfortunately.
That's the wrong mindset to have going into it. It's going to be not productive now because you thought that. But if you go into it,
I'm going to learn
how
something.
How can I help this call be productive? Let's find one way to make this a productive call.
I'm going to learn something from it one way. There you go. That's for sure. And I'm going to provide these people some sort of. I show up to every call and I want to connect people to 3 things of value. That's my goal on every single call.
There you go.
Connect them to something of value.
Do that. So, all right. Well, audience, this was a different episode this week. We were a little all over the place, but that's one of the things I can do with Ryan is just kind of riff on just about anything. So we may have him back on sometime to do a more kind of topic oriented combo. But for this week, you're just getting him and I talking shop, talking all about all our poor leadership qualities. But
it also gave me energy, like to your point about like, you know what, I'm ready for this week in a way that like, I feel good. I feel really good right now.
This is a great way to start a Monday. I do too, man. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope our listeners got some value out of this week.
Same.
We'll be back next week. So have a good one. Thank you so much.